see what they had and what they leave out. But it's wonderful that all of the talks I ever give, they're always recorded. But every time I give a talk, I remember all these amazing stories. I know there was one of my monks, he's a really good monk, he was from Penang, and he wanted to do it in stereo.
I said this one is better.
Okay. So you can really hear whatever, okay. Surround sound. That's why sometimes I do have lots of monks. At least I did have when I left a week ago. I'll go back tomorrow and find out how many are still there. I hope most of them are still there. But sometimes, we have lots of monks, a small monastery, well, big in land, but small in some of the buildings. And sometimes we have all the monks sitting around the dharna sala, the dining room. People have to squeeze in past us, and they're in the middle while we give the chanting. And I said, that's really powerful chanting. That really is surround sound. My monks all around you chanting. You can't escape from it. But it's also, even in Western countries, people love that. There's something powerful even about chanting. So often, my chanting stories, that many years ago, there's many Buddhists over in Australia, it's not just Thai Buddhists, it's wonderful to come here and see all of you here. And sometimes we get invited to do chanting for all sorts of nationalities. This was a Chinese man, and this Chinese man was in the ICU. He was in a coma, he was about to die, and his family, they heard that I was a good monk, so they called me and said, can you please come immediately to the hospital, into the ICU, because our patriarch is dying. He's going to die in a few hours. Can you come quickly? Because do some chanting for him. And of course, some of the problems I have is I'm always a bit too kind. I should be smarter, because I went to the hospital straight away. And when I got to the hospital, I never asked the family exactly what was wrong with him or what sort of chanting they wanted. So I think some of you may have heard the story. I went in there, straight into the ICU, of course, because I was a monk, they let me in. I did some chanting, some really powerful chanting, and he came out of the coma. Yeah, it was like a miracle. And I was so pleased with myself. And then I went into the waiting room to see the family and told them they were really angry at me. They said, look, we'd come over from Taiwan, Hong Kong, many parts of the world. We came over to see the patriarch of our family, off into his new life. We've already arranged the funeral service. Now we've got to cancel it. We came over, our businesses have probably lost a lot of money in our absence, and now for no reason he's going to live. And they were really upset at me. But because of that, I'm telling the true story, it's actually happened. And because of that, every time I go and chant for someone who's really sick, I always ask the relation, what type of chanting do you want? The get better chant or the die peacefully chant. And I've got to also check how sick they really are and what type of relationship the husband and wife have. Because sometimes I may say one thing and I'm not going to do it. But the chanting, and sometimes it does work. And it's fascinating why it is the first good example of beyond belief. How come it does work? Because recently, it was just the week before I left Perth to come here to Thailand, one of the gentlemen who came to my talk, it was a meditation class, he came into the talk wearing a bicycle helmet. And I was wondering why he was wearing that helmet, and he was sitting next to his sister, who often comes to the meditation class. He was a young man. And afterwards he came up to pay respects, and I said, "Why are you wearing the helmet?" And he said, "Because half of my skull is not here, it's in the fridge." Because what had happened, he had somebody attacked him in Kalgoorlie, and he came really close to dying. In fact, the doctors never expected him to regain consciousness. And because his sister was a close follower of mine, she really asked me, "Ajahn Brahm and all the other monks, can you do some chanting for my brother?" So we chanted and chanted and chanted and chanted almost every evening. And I did some personal chants for him as well. And he came out of a coma. You know, when people do come out of comas, sometimes it's something which they can feel or smell, which actually grabs their consciousness and takes them out of these dark places. I remember this one lady, many of you know Kun Alim. She was helping with the retreat over in the Meridian in Sawanabhumi. That's where I just came from this morning. And it was her auntie who was in a coma for 2 weeks, 14 days. And then she said it was like going into a really dark black place. What brought her out from that place was like the sound of a temple bell ringing. She could hear that, it was the first thing she could hear. And she followed that, and it drew her out of her coma. And she started the long, long path, about a couple of years, of rehabilitation, so she could talk and walk and think and do all of the things a normal person could. But this guy, he said what brought him out of his coma was the smell of a hamburger. He was Australian. So please don't worry if you should put a piece of tofu in there instead of a hamburger because you're vegetarian. If that's what gets him out of the coma, that's fine by me. And he said that with a laugh, but what really kept him going was all the chanting he was hearing from somewhere. And he said that's why he came to say thank you, wearing the motorbike helmet with half his brain gone, or half his skull gone. It would take put back later on, but you know, he's making good recovery of it. And the other thing which I was really impressed with is happiness. He was really joyful. The chanting was working. That's what he did. He said, "Please, thank you. Thank you for the chanting." How does the chanting work? Beyond belief? I think why it works is not the person or the group who does it, or what the chant actually is, but where it comes from. The energy which the chanter puts into that chant is like spreading metta to somebody, giving them a big boost to their own energy. And that is very, very powerful. So you can record the chant, you can play it again and again and again. I don't think that would work. It has to be like live. And when it is live, you know, from a really good monk, you can actually kind of feel it sometimes. I know sometimes people used to complain about some of the young Western monks when they were chanting, because it was always off-key. Look, it's supposed to be off-key sometimes. That's a special chant we use to get rid of ghosts. The ghosts can't stand it. Neither can you sometimes. So they run away. And I say this because you already mentioned I used to be a theoretical physicist before at Cambridge. And I still keep in touch with some of these great physicists, including the last 2 conferences which I helped organise. I invited one of my best friends from the time in Cambridge, Professor Bernard Carr. And I love my association with this fellow. He was the first Buddhist I ever met. Now imagine, you were born in London. I never knew any Buddhists. I didn't know what to do to try and find a Buddhist. It was only when I was 16 years of age I started to do well at school, and I brought my books on the different religions. Books on many different religions. Because I thought, if you're going to be rational, you shouldn't just choose a religion which your family or parents or local culture follow. You'd find what's the best one for you. It's called market research. So I did my market research, and I have to be honest with you, that my first book on Buddhism which I read, it didn't convert me, it just told me that that's who I was. I was a Buddhist. All those ideas and beliefs of Buddhism, that's who I was. So I started telling people I'm a Buddhist. That's all I knew. You know, the beliefs like Four Noble Truths and Noble Eightfold Path, rebirth. Rebirth made so much sense to me. It was beyond belief because you could prove it. It wasn't about belief anymore. It was like a natural truth, which to me, as a young scientist, was obvious. And I love all these stories of people who find out who they were before. One of those stories had nothing to do with Buddhism, about this TV personality in London. His name was Roy Hudd, H-U-D-D. Well, do you remember Huddy? You heard that name before? The same age as me. You're 72? Yeah. You remember him? Well, sorry?
And the book.
No, not him, that's another one.
Oh, still.
No, but anyhow, he was quite well known on TV in London, and he was doing a performance in some theatre in London. After the performance was over, he was driving back and he got lost because the London government had installed a new one-way system in the city. And he didn't know which way to go. He was trying to find his way, and he turned down one street where he had never been before in this life. And it was just the goosebumps, the shocks went through his body. He remembered everything on this street. Remember, in an old city like London, they keep it's okay, that was not your fault, that was just a past life. It must be a call from somebody. No, so I'm going off on a tangent because that reminded me of another story, a weird story, but these are true. You know, one of the chantings I did was for this Sri Lankan disciple who had a very bad cancer. A family collected all the money together. They sent her to a hospital in Singapore. I mean, they should have sent her to Samitivej. But nevertheless, they sent her to Singapore and nothing was working for her. She was dying. And so, the sister was a disciple of mine, and so the sister called the number of our monastery and said, I know it's doing the pansa, the rain retreat, but can I please, can I get my sister to listen to you? She can't talk any longer, cancer is that bad, but it'd be wonderful if you can chant for her and give her some advice. So that's what I did over the phone, did some chanting, give her some advice on basically what dying is and how to die, what to do when you get to that last stage. And she obviously she paid full attention, Sister rang me the next night and the next night. For 3 nights I gave her all this information. The 4th night there was no telephone call. I realised she must have died. The 5th night, the sister gave me a call. She said, you probably understand that my sister's passed away now. I said, yes, I understood that. But I just needed to call you because about 10 hours after the death, her sister, who was alive, got an email from her deceased sister. And she said you couldn't believe it. But there it was on the computer. And the email was saying, thank you for looking after me and the whole family. And please can you send a thank you to Ajahn Brahm for all his advice. And that was literally after she had died. And she couldn't move her hands, let alone get close to any computer, just walk out of her deathbed and go there and email something. It was an email after she had died. And that's kind of beyond belief, but the sister said, no, that happened, I've got it here in front of me. And that's where I discovered, what Gmail really means. It goes back. They got Wi-Fi on the other side. Is that beyond belief? That happened. And so much of the things which we sometimes are dubious about, is this real? Are these monks really making this up? The answer is no. That's why that man I've got so many unfinished stories. I'll do Roy Hutt first of all, then I go on to my first friend as a Buddhist. Roy Hutt, when he got lost, he went down this street and he thought he'd never been there, not in this life, but he remembered everything. He remembered a house where he'd lived before in previous life. And on that house, if you go to London, what's on the outside, looks the same. They're only allowed to renovate what's on the inside. That's why some of Bangkok, I can remember, but you've made so many changes on the outside. Sometimes, even though I was in Thailand for so many years and visited regularly, sometimes I would get lost. But in London, the streets always basically look the same. The houses pretty much look the same. It's inside they make all the renovations. So he remembered everything. And he was pleased to see on the outside of the house was one of the blue circular plaques. And someone who was well known had lived there before. So anyhow, he knocked on the door and people answered, and because he was a TV personality down in Lima, they trusted him, they let him in. And he said, I used to live here before. They said, come off it, we've been living here since the Second World War. And they said, it was before then. And he took him around the house and showed them all the renovations and changes they had made in that house. And of course, they were, the word is discombobulated. That's one of my favourite English words. It means confused. I could have said confused, but I prefer saying the word discombobulated because it's a much nicer word to say. So they're really confused, but he was a TV personality, so they kind of trusted him. And he said in his previous life, he was one of the most famous music hall personalities. In those days, they didn't have TV in London. This was in the it was after the First World War, before the First World War, 1910, 1920. His name was Dan Leno, D-A-N-L-E-N-O. And as a result of that, they had this article, everything checked out. So it was obviously he wasn't inventing this. And when it was published, a little article which he wrote, that's when his career nosedived. Because he was contracted, I think, with the ITV company, one of the two TV broadcasters in UK. And the head of the ITV was a very devout Christian. And he said, I don't want him in my organisation anymore. He suffered. But what happened to him was he wrote books about the life of Dan Leno. They were so accurate because he was Dan Leno in his previous life. And he suffered for that. And I say that because the fact that he suffered, the fact that he basically lost his career, was kind of proof that people don't do these for any benefit. They do this just for the sake of truth. It's one of my statements. Never allow your beliefs or your experience to stand in the way of truth. Truth is something which is right in front of you. You're not crazy, you're very clear, and this is actually happening. Maybe it was because of an experience in my family. When I was young, well actually before I was young, before I was born, my mother and my auntie grew up as sisters during the Second World War. And after the Second World War, they hung out together, they went to dances looking for husbands together. And one day, they went to see one of these mediums. You can actually predict you are going to meet Ajahn Brahm today. Did anyone say that? If they did, it was right. But anyway, this medium said to my auntie, if you are going to meet the love of your life and get married to this guy very soon. They are, yeah, just people say these things, how can you know? And his name will be Donald, which is an easy name, a common name. His surname will be Wolfreys, Wolfreys. That is very uncommon. And of course, my mother was there. She heard it. And a few days later, they went to a dance. That's where you used to go, to meet your partners in those days. And this nice young man came up to my auntie and asked her to dance. And what's your name? My auntie said, my name is Opal. What's your name? Donald. Surname, Wolfreys. It actually happened. And they were married for 60 years. And surprisingly, she's such a healthy woman, my auntie Opal. She's still alive. Even today. I think she's in her 90s or 99 or something. And the last I heard, I wouldn't know if she passed away, but she's really healthy. It's kind of weird. But nevertheless, I asked my auntie, I asked my mum so many times, and they said, yeah, that's true, it happened. How? How could something like that happen? As far as Buddhism is concerned, what's going on there? There must be some really strong karma, but this is what happens. And anyway, the truth is, it may be beyond my belief, I was always struggling to figure out, is that true, is that true, is that true? But it was. So there's much about life which is sometimes hard for us to embrace. One of the other fascinating parts of life, and it's appropriate to talk about this here, is sickness. This is in a hospital. So I think you should all be really fascinated. The sorts of things which I have seen, explored, known about, which how things like the mind can interfere with sicknesses. And I say this, I'm really interested in this, and I feel a responsibility to say this, because it can save a lot of suffering in people's lives, unnecessary suffering. I know that sometimes people say, oh, you're a Buddhist, you should just endure suffering. Oh yes. If I break a leg, I'm going to get it fixed up, I hope. Will you do that for me, Dr. Vinay? I'm not going to just say, oh, I broke my leg, it's my karma, I just have to endure and go hobbling around for the rest of my life. So if there's something you can do, you do it. But anyhow, the story I'm going to tell now, many of you may have heard it. The person who's happened to wrote a book about it, has done documentaries about it. It was a lady in Hong Kong called Anita Morajani. Have you seen her, read her book? Read it. You met her? Read it? Yeah. Okay. But anyhow, the story. She had terrible cancers all over her body. Eventually, she was working in Hong Kong, but she was Indian by birth. And she was very successful, but she had these cancers, and eventually they had her last operation. And the doctors tried everything, but she passed away on the operating table. And that's when the interesting stuff happens. She said after she died, then she went floating up towards this light. This beautiful light. And I've been talking about that the last week because that's called nimittas in Buddhism. And I know there are some people who teach meditation, they say, no, the Buddha never taught that. That's why in the last retreat I even did a sutta discussion on the Upakilesa Sutta, number 1 to 8 of the Majjhima Nikaya, what the Buddha said about nimittas. They're part and parcel of meditation, and if you can kind of use them and develop them, you get into the jhanas, the deep meditations, where all the amazing stuff really happens. And so I don't think I told this enough at that retreat. There's many of you here who were on that retreat, saying that don't worry, if you don't get nimittas on a meditation retreat, you will eventually. Everyone here, even if you haven't meditated before, will experience a nimitta when you die. Haven't you heard people say, when you die, you see this light and you float up towards the light? Have you heard that? Have any of you had near-death experiences? You will. You know, that's one of the reasons why I like teaching like this. You may not understand it or realize its importance now, but one day you will. And when you will, fantastic. This is real, this is what happens. When a person dies, you see this beautiful light, you float up to it and enter it. And that's what happened to Anita Morajani. She was a Catholic, not a Buddhist. So when she entered that light, she described it, she came up afterwards, she survived, and she described it as like a union with God. Incredible bliss, energy, and it's like she wasn't there. She had disappeared. And that's precisely how I teach these entering the nimittas and jhanas. It's not a union with God. It's a union of being inside this huge amount of bliss and happiness. Sometimes there's hardly any difference between that experience of bliss and happiness and what many people say is pure love. Love is not something which is attached to another being. Well, this type of love is something which is just really selfless bliss. And the selflessness about that is also really important. That's why, I don't know if she's here, but she was telling me she was getting into some nice deep states, these nimittas, and she was wanting to get in, but she was afraid because it's like she had to disappear, like she had to vanish. And that is so accurate. Sometimes people ask me, Ajahn Brahm, you've taught us for so many years. I've written books about jhanas. Has that been translated yet into Thai? Chun Chun Lepisan? Invitation for you. But these are the deep meditations. So because I've been talking about this and talking about this for a long time, sometimes people ask me, okay, Ajahn Brahm, be honest. Ajahn Brahm, can you enter a jhana? Are you interested? There's an inherent, the one reason why monks don't talk about this, there's an inherent problem. If I boast, I lie about it, I say yes I can do it and I can't, then that is one of the worst offences for a monk. You'd have to disrobe right here. You're not a monk anymore. Even if you say, yes you can, and you're right, you're being honest, that's also against the rules for being a monk. And that is so frustrating that I kind of found a loophole. But it's not a loophole which is just for the sake of finding loopholes. It's actually helping people understand how these experiences of the mind happen and how you can experience them too. It also explains this point about Anita Morjani. I told people, the first time I confessed this was when I was in Sri Lanka, just giving a talk to lots of monks in a forest monastery in Sri Lanka. And they said, they had me on camera, and they said, Ajahn Brahm, you have to give an answer because there's no lay people here, it's just monks. You can't use the excuse that I can't tell you because there's lay people here. So I told them, I confessed. I said, Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhana. Be careful, there's more to that question than you think. I'm always being sneaky. Don't just listen to the first answer. And I said, and this is important, that's why I say it like this. No one can criticize me for that now. I say, Ajahn Brahm has to disappear first. Your sense of self and ownership and being the person who does anything, that has to stop and vanish. You disappear. You don't do anything anymore. And then those states happen, naturally, automatically. So it wasn't just answering a very difficult question and still telling the truth. I was actually telling people how these states of deep meditation happen. You're sitting there, you stop doing things, you vanish. The person you take yourself to be is gone. And then these states occur. And that's precisely what this lady, Anita Morjani, said. That's why I mentioned her. It's like, you don't do it, you don't own it. You're not there to control it. sense of you doing anything disappears. That's why you can never, anybody who really knows these states, you can never call them an attainment. It's why Ajahn Brahm, he drummed this into me again and again and again. He said, you don't meditate to attain things. You meditate to let go of things, to allow things to disappear. Too many times people meditate, they want to achieve things. And they never do, they get frustrated. You meditate to let go of things to disappear, and then they happen. You can't own them. But anyway, the other reason why I tell the story that Samitivej jhana wasn't even a Buddhist was that when she came up with that jhana, that nimitta, what happens next after you get samadhi, stillness, nimittas or jhanas? You get insight. You get incredible understanding and knowledge. And the thing which was really, she needed to find out, why did she have cancer? And that was obviously pressing on her mind, and she saw the answer. She saw the answer, the reason for her cancer was nothing physical. It was the emotion of trying to be perfect. Even though she'd been a very, very successful woman, a good family, successful business, it was trying to be even better, which was giving this very deep stress inside of her, which was the cause of her cancer. It wasn't like a diagnosis that a doctor could ever give. It was weird, beyond belief. But that's what she said when she came out from the anaesthetic. The doctors, the cancer's gone. The doctors thought she's a bit crazy, just out of anaesthetic. Her brain is not functioning properly yet, which is very pleased that she's recovered. And that's when she said, no, the cancer, maybe a few tumours there, and the thing causing it has gone. And of course she was right. She's a healthy woman, that all the tumours vanished very quickly. And the other reason I tell this story, because her GP at the time was stunned by this. Her GP at the time was a doctor called Brian Walker. And it changed the whole way he looked at medicine. So much so that he decided to leave Hong Kong and travel to Australia. And he found a nice surgery to practice in the town of Serpentine in Western Australia. He's now my GP. It's true. So, and he's a Buddhist. He comes up to our monastery every now and again, we can find time off. And he's my GP. Unfortunately, I don't give him much work. I'm too healthy. So nevertheless, that's a kind of weird story. How come one of these interesting stories, and the GP, who was Samitivej jhana's GP, moved to Serpentine in Western Australia, that's the location of my monastery, and she's my GP now. It's kind of weird. But there's so many cases like that beyond belief in medicine. And I told all the stories, and sometimes it's very hard to believe, and sometimes it shows you there is some hope, no matter how much stuff is going on inside of your body. I've seen it too many times. Hang on, am I talking too long? Am I? Okay. I can go on forever. George, this was another case. George, who was a Cockney, he was such a thick accent Cockney, he would come into Bodhinyana Monastery, and I was the only one who could translate for him. Even all the other monks could understand a word he was saying. But he had cancer, he smoked. Because he smoked so much, he got lung cancer. And he said that he went to see his oncologist, and the oncologist told him, he said, look, it's in both lungs. Showed me in those days x-rays. You know, we can't do surgery, otherwise you'll have no lobes of your lungs left. And we can do a radiation therapy or chemotherapy, but that's only going to extend your life by maybe 3 or 4 months. We never know, but that's about what we expect. But we'll do it if you want, even an extra 3 or 4 months. And he said, I'll talk it over with my wife. So he talked it over with his wife, and he went back a week later. He said, well, what's the point of going through all that just for an extra few months? So he said, just let nature take its course. He was prepared to die. And that's when they insisted, like doctors do, let's to check how it's progressed. They gave him another x-ray. And then he went into his specialist rooms, and the specialists were looking at the new x-ray, shaking his head. And poor old George got really afraid. It's got worse, hasn't it? How many days have I got? And that's when his doctor looked up and said, George, it hasn't got worse. It's totally disappeared. What the heck have you been doing? I don't think he said heck, he said another word. But I can't say that because I'm a monk. And that's when George said, meditating. The doctor said, carry on. He lived, I don't know how many, 10 or 15 years afterwards, kept coming to our monastery. It actually works. There was this other guy, okay, this is stories now. This other guy in Penang, he came to see me on one of the retreats. He had this terrible disease, I don't know even what its name was, but your neural pathways get tangled in your brain. And it's deadly. And now he decided I'll just let nature take its course, but then he changed his mind because he just got married. He thought, it's not fair on my wife. So he said, no, let's do the operation, no matter how much it cost. And that was done over in Singapore. And they had the experts over there apparently. And when he went to that operation, it was very painful. They couldn't give him anesthetic when they were just cutting through his skull to get into his brain. And not very certain what would happen. It was a success. So he survived. But then the problem came a couple of years later when it relapsed. And he went down to the hospital and said, yeah, it's back again, it's as it was before, we'll have to do another operation or you'll die. And this poor young man, he came to see me then, over in Penang when I was teaching a retreat. And he told me he had got married and his wife was now pregnant. And I just said, I just can't do this. I can't abandon my wife when she's about to give birth to my first child. So he said, I have to do this really painful operation again. And that's when I gave him some instructions on meditation. And it's amazing when it's life and death. It's amazing how much energy and devotion and commitment you give to meditation. When you come into an 8-day retreat, I never see that amount of dedication. But when it's life and death, you really get into it. And so he did that. And he went down to, he told me afterwards, he went down to the hospital, prepared for the operation, to shave his hair and just put this brace on his skull. And he was only doing this because of his wife and child. He was just bracing for the pain. And they gave him another CT scan. And then afterwards, if this happens to you, get excited. The doctors came out and said, there's something wrong with the machine. Yes, did the CT scan again. When they did it again, they said, it's gone. We don't have to do the operation. What have you been doing? Now that may be only one example. I'm sure, I hope that you've had some of those examples as well. You know, being a doctor in this hospital. Sometimes it's not miraculous. There must be something going on there. It's not just beyond belief. I want to find out exactly why. And that is why, going back to that story of one of the first Buddhists I ever met, the reason I met him, because when I went to Cambridge to study, there were all these societies you could join. And they had what's called Societies Fair. So they were all advertising what they were doing, and you could just join up. And one of those societies was the Horse and Hounds, fox hunting. There's no way I'm going to join that. But then I saw Cambridge University Buddhist Society. I couldn't believe it. There's actually a Buddhist society at this university in 1969? Yeah. So I went up to the counter. I was really excited. And I told the man in front of the counter, another student, I want to join. And he told me, look, you don't have to join a Buddhist society. Just come and see. Test it out. I said, look, I'm a Buddhist. I want to join. He said, no. Come to one of the talks, and if you still really like it, then you can join. And that's when I had my first argument with him. I want to join. Here's the pound note. Put my name down. And that was eventually, I was Bernard. Eventually, Professor Bernard Clark. The reason I mention him, two reasons. First of all, he was one of the inner circle of Stephen Hawking. He also was a theoretical physicist. And apparently there was a movie about Stephen Hawking's life, and Bernard was featured on it. He was somebody who was acting the part of Bernard, but he was actually in the film. That's how close he was. And Bernard came to, Stephen Hawking came to Bernard's wedding. So they were really that close. But also, he was a Buddhist, and thirdly, he was a member, the president of the Psychic Research Society. He'd go hunting ghosts with me. We honestly did that. If there was a place, there was a haunting, or a reported haunting, we'd go to investigate. That's what scientists are supposed to do. Find out the truth of these things. Is this just fake or what is it? I'm sure that in a hospital there's many ghosts. I think you all know the story of the hospital on the other side of the river for the guard, the central field. Anyway, what's it called now? The main hospital in Bangkok. Samitivej Hospital. Apparently, this happened many years ago now. There was a doctor finishing his night shift. He went in the elevator, and that's one of the reasons I told your brother, let's not go in the elevator, let's walk. I said that, didn't I? Yeah. You didn't know why. And so he went in the elevator to go down to the car park to get his car to drive home. There was another nurse in the elevator with him, a witness. And then before they got to the car park level, the elevator doors opened and there was a patient outside. The doctor freaked out, pushed and closed the door buttons as fast as he could. Because it was a patient, he wasn't that fit and healthy, so the doors closed. The patient could get in. And the nurse was very angry. Why did you do that? That's one of the patients in this hospital. We're supposed to care for them. And that's when the doctor said, that was one of my patients who died last night. I was the doctor. And then also, he said, did you not see the red string on their hand? I don't know if they do they still do that? In Samitivej, another hospital, in those days they did. That when somebody died, they put a red string on their wrist, actually to show that they had passed away. Is that still done? No, yes? Not red string. In Syria, in those days, the red string. So the doctor said to the nurse, didn't you see the red string on his hand? Showed he'd passed away. And that's when the nurse lifted up her hand. I've got a red string too. Does that mean I can't go with? That's not just a joke. Apparently that happened. The poor doctor fainted, as you can understand. And they found this fainted doctor on the floor of the lift, no one else around. And when we revived him, that's what he said. They checked out his story. That poor nurse died on the way to work in a car accident. She was also dead. They would never do anything to harm you, ghosts. That's why with Bernard we had all these experiments, all this, what's it called, data. What happens when a person dies? And just how you don't have to be afraid at all. They can't harm you. And in fact they can help you sometimes. Beyond belief. What about dogs? Can dogs die and become ghosts? Be careful, they can. There's one of my disciples. You may know him, that was one of the martial artists. Because he always comes and helps out if we ever have any functions. He's a Thai man. He got some won some big class of Thai boxing many years ago. So he opened up a gym in Perth. A very nice disciple. But anyway, his neighbour was a builder. And the neighbour would always have his dog go in the back of his pickup truck, we call them utes, on the way to work. And one day his poor dog got sick and died. So, they went to the vet, it was euthanized. And the next day, the builder got up to go to work, opened the door of his little house, and the dog ran in past him. And that looked just like his dog who had died the day before. It can't be, he's dead. It looked just like him. So it didn't just look like him. That dog then went to each room of the house and just curled up in a corner for 1 or 2 minutes, and then got up, and then went to the back of their house where they always would have a leaky tap. And that dog, when it was alive, would always go to that leaky tap for a drink of water. It's very hot over in Western Australia. And he'd always have a drink from the tap. And that's what this dog from nowhere did. And then this dog went up the stairs to the bedrooms. And in the bedroom, the builder's wife was half asleep. And it would always be the dog's kind of last act before it went to work with its owner, the builder, to put up its muzzle to kiss the wife. And she'd always kiss their dog, goodbye when the dog went to work. And his wife was half asleep and didn't realise the dog, which put up his muzzle to be kissed was a ghost. She kissed a ghost dog. Be careful. And then the ghost dog went downstairs. The Buddha took photographs of it. And the neighbour, Pond, the Thai boxer, he showed me all his photos. He said it looked like a real dog. But this was the one which had passed away and died. And then it went to drop into the back of the ute to go to work with its owner. The owner said, no, enough. You're dead. And so the dog turned around, ran to the end of the street and disappeared. Vanished forever. Just like one last visit home after it had died. You don't need to be scared. The dog never did anything bad or harmed anybody. But just it freaked out the wife when she really woke up and what she'd done. She kissed the ghost dog. Ah! So you don't really need to be afraid. Am I really going over time? I'm supposed to do something else on that. Yeah. You should stop me because I can go on for hours if you want. I'm getting big trouble.
Actually, we still enjoy listening, but I think the plan is we would like to have guided meditation like Brian has said for about 15 minutes.
15 or 15?
What fine.
Right, fine, okay. And then we have enough time for a Q&A?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So, it's an easy meditation. And you don't need to be afraid of anything. I know that sometimes there are ghosts in hospitals. But don't worry, the ghosts are scared of me. So ghosts, keep out. You're not afraid of monks. Okay. Do you have some questions and answers? Sorry about the meditation, that was not my fault. I never did that. Yes?
I think we're in Q&A.
Q&A. Yeah.
Let me ask the question.
Questions? Wow, okay. You at the front.
So nice to see you again, Ajahn. Welcome back.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Ajahn, you talk a lot about jhanas. I don't know if I've had any experience of it, probably not. But I was told by another teacher that jhanas is still in the realm of the mind. It's still a state of mind. And in order to transcend suffering, you got to transcend jhanas as well. Have you heard anything?
What I have heard is what the Buddha taught. Nati janang apanyasa panyanati ajayato yamhi janang chapanya jasa venibada Samitivej. Verse 372 of the Dhamma. Have a look. What that means. Don't you know what that means?
No.
Of course not. It means there is no jhana without wisdom, there's no wisdom without jhana. The one who has jhana and wisdom, they're in the presence of the Dhamma. This is what the Buddha said. And even, I can quote, I know my stuff, I don't make it up. This is Bhagavad Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 64. You can't even abandon the first 5 fetters to be a non-returner without going through the jhanas first. No more than you can get to the heartwood of a tree, the pith, without going through the bark and the sapwood. That's the Buddha's simile. Just after the Buddha passed away, someone went to ask Ananda, who was the go-to person, said, what type of meditation did the Buddha teach? Ananda replied, the Buddha only taught 4 types of meditation. first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. Sama Samadhi, eighth factor of the Eightfold Path. It's first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. The Buddha kept on talking about this again and again and again. Samadhi pachaya yata bhutayana dasana. Samadhi, Samadhi is jhana. Samadhi, stillness, is the cause for seeing things as they truly are. Even when I gave a talk over in South Korea once, we had a number of senior monks. Ajahn Brahm was there. But then one of the things we did, I love just going off track, but one of the things we did there, we were supposed to go for a walk in the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between South Korea and North Korea. It's a really dangerous place. And I must admit, I was shocked many times. With video cameras, and other cameras. I was shocked many times. That was Buddhist, thank goodness. But then they wanted somebody to go on a walk with everybody. And we were walking meditation for about 2 hours each way. It was only a few years ago. And people thought I wasn't fit. I did it. You know, one of the things which happened, which was fascinating for me, I did get tired after walking for about an hour. I hadn't prepared for anything. But then, my meditation kicked in, and I said, my mind told me this, the insight, to walk faster, not slower. Because usually when you get tired, you want to sit down or walk slower. So no, walk faster. And then all the energy came in. I did that 4-hour walk without a problem. It's kind of weird. But those kind of insights come up, which are not usual, because you're listening to your mind, not your brain. So that's kind of what happens over there. And this is what happens with things like jhana. They are essential if you want to become a monitor or an arahat. The Buddha taught an eightfold path, not a sevenfold path. But it's fascinating for me. I don't know why this is the case, but even in Vietnam, they have the Theravada monks in the south of Vietnam, and they had the Mahayana monks in the northern part of Vietnam, but they've always worked together in harmony. They have a united Buddhist Sangha. But one day they had a meeting many years ago, and they decided to make a rule that monks should not teach jhana to lay people. And I think that's really offensive. It's just my conditioning brought up in the West. They've rescinded that rule now. But even today, you can ask other monks, not me. Look at the sutras, look at the Vinaya, it's there in every page almost. Dhamma pachaya yata. You need those things. Some people say, look, Ajahn Brahm, why waste your time teaching these things to lay people? And the reason is because you try that, instead of being rebellious, and lay people won't get them. Just like in the time of the Buddha. You can experience those things. And if you do, I love this statement. Just a statement of the year for me. What the Buddha said, if you can experience in that first jhana, what's it like? The Buddha said, and it's not Ajahn Brahm, it's Buddha, so you don't have to argue. The Buddha said, if you can experience just the first jhana, what you experience is a bliss called Sambodhi Sukha. Sambodhi Sukha means enlightenment bliss. That kind of, shocked me, because this is not enlightenment. Everyone agrees on that. It's close, it's not enlightenment. But you are getting a taste of enlightenment. This is what it feels like. It's a wonderful thing to be able to give a person a taste of enlightenment, what Sambodhi is, what it feels like. Not describing intellectual terms, not actually giving names, but describe the feeling of it, the experience of it. Of course, that's huge. And lay people get it. There was this one guy, this is my fault, I apologize, when somebody asks me a question, I'll give a sermon. But this one Aussie guy who came to one of my retreats, and he was one of the most unlikely cases to actually even come on a retreat. He had tattoos all over him, big bushy hair. He looked really tall and rough. He looked really tall and rough. And I judged him, which you should never do. And I told him, I said, I think you don't come to the wrong place. This is a meditation retreat center. If you want to visit some of your friends, the prison farm is 6 kilometers up the road. He looked like he was like a prisoner, or someone going to visit his business. I've never seen him before. So anyway, he said, no, I'm on your retreat. He was. And when we have these interviews on retreat, he blew my mind because he actually had a jhana. A real one, not a fake one, not just for one moment. Sometimes people make them up. This kind of a thing. It's amazing. People you least expect get these incredible experiences. And he disappeared afterwards. I didn't know where he went to. But I found him. Somebody met him again over in the New South Wales area. And of course, they said it changed his whole life. Obviously for the better. It's a powerful state of mind. You can experience it. Even kids can. There was this 6 or 7-year-old kid, and he was sitting under a tree one day when his father was doing some sort of ceremony, and he got jhana. You know what his name was? Siddhartha Gautama. It can be done. That was the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. His father was doing the ploughing ceremony. That's why we have the ploughing ceremony down here in Bangkok. Because remember that occasion. You don't have to be male either. So many amazing nuns in the time of the Buddha and other women with incredible deep meditations. That's what happens. Any other question? Yes?
How do you distinguish between vipassana and samatha?
How do you distinguish between samatha and vipassana? This is our Ajahn Brahm would answer that question. He was asked it many times. This is the front of the hand, this is the back of the hand. You can only see the back of my hand now, but the front is there, just behind. Now you can see both. Samatha, vipassana. They always go together. You cannot distinguish them. How the Buddha taught. Once upon a time, there was an emperor who had run a huge empire. He had a son. He wanted to teach his son how to take over eventually, once the emperor passed away. So, he sent his son off to the bordering kingdom, gave him full authority to rule the kingdom as he wished. And after a year, this was the first time that the son was out of his father's jurisdiction. So he played, the first time away from home. He played, partied, enjoyed himself, and after a year, the headman of the village in the area complained to the emperor, "Your son is not doing anything, he's just playing around enjoying himself." So the emperor sent one of his ministers to teach his son how to rule a kingdom. That's what he was there for, to learn. Make mistakes, but learn. And as soon as the minister arrived in his bordering kingdom and said, "I've come from your father, you're not running the kingdom properly," and the king, the emperor's son, said, "I don't care where you came from, this is my kingdom, get out. I'm not listening to you." So the minister had to go home. When he went back to the king said, "Oh yes, my mistake. I just sent you. Now you go back there, but this time I'm going to send you with the fiercest general in my army. The two of you go together." So the emperor sent the wise minister and the fierce general. They went together. When they arrived at the kingdom, the king saw the minister and said, "You again? I thought I told you to get out of here. Get out of here." And then the general took out his sword, grabbed the king by the head, and put the sword to his throat and said, "I am a general in your father's army. You had better listen to this minister." And the king said, I'm listening. It's amazing how mindful you are with the sword pointing to your throat. And then the minister explained to him about how to rule a kingdom. And the king was actually listening this time. And as a result of that, he became a very good king. So that when the emperor died, he could take over. And the Buddha told that story. He said, the wise minister is called Vipassana. The fierce soldier is called Samatha. You need both of them. You need Samatha to hold you still enough so that wisdom can teach you. That's how it works. That makes sense? I don't know why it is, but all meditation in Thailand is called Vipassana now. No matter what you do. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you do it. Why?
I just wanted to ask a question. How can you tell the difference between when you are doing your practice when you meditate naturally, or you're forcing yourself? How can you tell the difference?
How you can tell that because if you force yourself, it doesn't work. You get stressed out. Okay, I usually tell this simile every time. Okay, you're closest. Could you come up here, please? I'm now going to hold this cup of tea perfectly still. Has it stopped moving yet? See, moving or not? It's moving. Okay, why is it moving? Why hasn't it become still yet? Because I am not mindful. I'm not looking at it. Now I'm mindful of the tea. Has it stopped moving yet? Still moving. I will now concentrate. Use force. This is when you realize that meditation is not working. You're forcing, you're concentrating, and it never becomes still. So, many people meditate like that and they get frustrated. They think they can't meditate. They're doing it wrong. How can I get this cup of tea to be perfectly still? Have you ever heard that word before? Let go, detach, put it down, stop grasping. And if you do that, it's easy. That's how you know the difference if you're trying, forcing it, or letting it go. all the Buddha taught was all about restraint. Stop it. Okay, that's in the front of my mind. This novice in Wat Pah Pong years ago, Ajahn Chah was giving one of these talks which went on and on and on and on and on and on. And this little novice, he was only 11, 12 years of age, he was only there, had nowhere else to go. This is okay for these, grown-up monks, but when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When is Ajahn Chah going to stop? And that became like a mantra for him. When's he going to stop? When's he going to stop? And then, this little novice had a moment of wisdom, of insight. Instead of saying, when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? The novice thought, when am I going to stop? And apparently that novice stopped. He went into the deep meditations. When he opened his eyes, all the monks had left. They packed up their things, they were noisy, they weren't absolutely quiet, but this novice hadn't heard anything. It was the middle of the morning, he missed the arms round, which meant that he would miss his lunch that day. If he didn't make the arms round, he couldn't eat the 1 meal of the day. So this little novice went hungry, but he wasn't at all upset. He just had one of the most beautiful experiences of his life.
Did that mean he reached the jhana?
Yes.
But how do you feel? You were no one was around. I don't know how to explain, but
His 5 senses are not available to him. You can't see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Even that experience of Greg, I mentioned his name a few days ago, it was many years ago, but I was there. He would only meditate 40 minutes or something. One Sunday afternoon, he had nothing on the TV, so he told his wife he's going into his bedroom to meditate. After about an hour, he hadn't come out, so his wife checked up on him, and he was in the bedroom, sitting in a perfect meditation posture, really still, too still. He wasn't breathing. What would you do? They rang 000, which is the emergency number in Australia. And it was a Sunday afternoon, so an ambulance came really quickly with the sirens waiting. And the medics rushed in and they took one look at him. He wasn't breathing. They felt his pulse. There was no sign of any pulse. He was dead. So they put him in the back of the ambulance, rushed him to the hospital. His wife accompanied him as she would do. She was freaking out. When they got him to the hospital, the triage nurses put all these machines on him. There was no pulse. There was no brain activity. He was dead. They thought. Of course he wasn't. He told me all about it afterwards. He said what his wife said was they put these electric shocks on his chest, the defibrillators. Apparently they don't do that anymore. They usually give adrenaline or something. I'm not sure. But anyhow, that's what his wife said. These big shocks on his chest to try and get his heart going. Now you can really feel those. I've seen pictures of them. The body actually moves up from the bed. They tried everything. Nothing worked. The only lucky thing which he had was the doctor on duty that afternoon was from Indian descent. His parents had migrated to Australia from India. And he'd heard that someone who meditates and go into these states where you suspend your life activities. And he knew he was meditating. He wasn't breathing, his heart wasn't beating. And he said one interesting thing to know, as doctors or nurses, he was still warm. Now that's in the Mahavajra Sutta, said by the Buddha, the difference between being dead and being in a deep meditation is your body is still warm in deep meditation. So if that ever happens to me, in your monk's hut, in your place, and if I'm sitting there in the morning when you come to offer the breakfast or whatever, and I go, don't call the ambulance. Get people just to feel me, am I warm? If I'm still warm, leave me alone. If I'm really cold, then you better call the ambulance. So he just decided to come out of his meditation. I said, how did he come out? I said, well, it was time to come out. And as soon as he came out, you could hear I don't know if that's what they do, I'm not a doctor, but the ECG and the EEG were all normal, no more flat lines. And the doctor gave him a full checkup, nothing wrong with him. And he walked home with his wife. They didn't even keep him in overnight. He was really healthy. And I asked him, was there anything unpleasant about that? He said, no. Actually, he said there was. While he was experiencing those deep states, he was perfectly, beautifully happy. But what happened afterwards, he said the unpleasant part was the scolding he got from his wife. Don't ever think of doing that ever again. It really frightened her. He was having the time of his life. So that's actually what happens. Examples. So you're having a great time. Enjoy it. And the other thing, which I've never checked this out, but it seems to happen, when you've got anecdotal evidence of this, if you are really sick and get into one of these deep states of meditation, sickness seems to pass. Now Ajahn Brahm said that's how he overcame his malaria fever. Most forest monks have that. That's just what you get living in the forest in nature. And I know this other monk who had got typhus. And even who's sick could still let go enough, disappear enough to experience the jhana. When he came out, I think that was the end of his typhus. It's kind of weird, these things. They're real, they happen. And there are so many benefits to them. Yeah, come on.
Following up from that, if you go into Dhamma and basically you stop thinking, all your body fasting, it stops. And on the other side, you've actually got the Vipassana, you actually have the rule and that's the assumption is that those are the natural function, the Dhamma of that. They actually exist on their own without the mind controlling them, no matter where they go. Those actually continue and the word exists is not correct, but let's use that. I'm just trying to match those two, where jhana, everything stops, including the natural functions of the body. With us is actually accept that the root and noun exists no matter what the mind actually receives.
Yes. Now I understand how the Buddha taught that when jhana happens, the nama is called the objects of the mind of all consciousnesses. There's 6 types of consciousness. And the nama is the objects, basically. Without nama, there's no vijnana. So without vijnana, there's no nama. So the nama stops and ceases. It's not there all the time. Vijnana stops. In the jhana, the mano vijnana, the mind consciousness, is by itself and still very much going enjoying itself just with consciousness active. And blissful. So some of the Vipassana teachings, like the one you said, is not how the Buddha explained this in the sutras. It comes from the Abhidhamma. And that is one of the problems. In the first council, where 500 monks met together to be able to chant and collect all the teachings of the Buddha, it's every recension of that first council, every tradition, they all maintain that it was Ananda recited the 5 Nikayas. 5 Nikayas are Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and Gutta Nikaya, and Khuddaka Nikaya. And the Pali recited the Vinaya. There was never any mention of Abhidhamma. And the size of it makes it very hard to accept that that was part of one of these other little Nikayas. And even the language of the Abhidhamma, the words used. So, for example, you can read like a book about Harry Potter. You can read Shakespeare. You can know which language is earlier, which one is later. And that was linguistic analysis which was refined, trying to find out when the Krishna Bible was written, which ones are authentic, which was added. And we use that also on things like Abhidhamma. You can find, there's lots of evidence for saying that was later than the time of the Buddha. It's pretty convincing. Don't worry if you feel cold. We have Buddhist climate control now. Buddhist climate control is when you feel cold, keep a warm heart. When you feel hot, keep a cool head. Keep a warm heart. Jai Why Jai Lord? So that's actually just, that comes a lot from the Abhidhamma teaching. And if you want to know where Vipassana came from, the one which you are talking about, that came from one of the sayadaws in Burma. It was Lady Sayadaw, L-E-D-I, Sayadaw. And it came about because his little organisation got really concerned when the British, my ancestors, I bear some responsibility for my ancestors, when they started making conquests over in Burma at the time, especially when they basically captured and overran Mandalay. And there was a huge centre there. Many of the monks, including Lady Sayadaw, were really concerned that this may be the end of Buddhism in Burma. And because of that, he started this tradition, which now became the Vipassana tradition, as you know it today, to try and make Buddhism meditation easier for the lay community. Again, thinking that jhana was just too hard. But if you, there's a couple of books published recently, about 5 or 6 years ago, were describing this. You know, the origins, the source of this idea called Vipassana. In the old days, there was just eightfold path, nothing else. No shortcut, no easy way. But he instituted that because he wanted to make Buddhism, especially meditation, easier for the lay community in Burma. And from there it went to disciples, and to Vipassana as we know today. And a lot of times, I have to say this, I don't like getting into trouble, I have to say there's many of the things which they teach are not really all that helpful.
Okay, we're running out of time.
Must have said something wrong about getting rid of me.
So, it's better call it night. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Ajahn Brahm, for coming to give us a valuable Dhamma talk tonight. And we hope to see you again sometime soon in the future.
Okay, you see this evening?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Ajahn Brahm. Thank you very much, everyone.
And I apologize for spending so much time on other things. I couldn't answer more questions. And I hope I answered the questions you gave me well enough. Thank you, everybody. Should we do some sort of chanting? I'll give a quick blessing for you all. Because I really know that this chanting works. But the chanting I'm going to give you is not the dry beat. It's the baby. Sabhavoga vinimuto sabha santapo vajito sabhavera mati gando niputo chatuambhava sabitiyo vivachantu sabhavoga vinasatu mate bhavanvantavayo sukhitikayo gopava Abhivadana silit sadicham bhuta pacharino chataro dhamma vatanti ayuvano sukham balam. Okay. So please make sure you don't die on the way home. Otherwise my reputation will be shot.